What is up, gamers? I'm back with another Duel Masters deck profile. This time I got the light deck box. This is, after all, a light deck, but it's also got some water and darkness cards I'm going to show you right now. Of course, it is featuring the mighty and powerful Hydro Hurricane. So Hydro Hurricane, this is a devastating fan favorite card. It is absolutely beloved and despised, depending on who you ask. So this is a very powerful effect, but you do need to build an entire deck around it. You need a lot of light and darkness creatures to get a good payoff from it, although you typically want to skew it more towards light because mana burning the opponent is just way more brutal than just bouncing some stuff. I'll show you what I did for building the deck. I initially was trying to play the more blocker heavy stall variant where I would use a lot of slash chargers and other spells just to draw the game out, to perform a deck out, but I eventually concluded that that wasn't really the most fun strategy. It was boring to play and it wasn't fun to play against either, so I decided to make my own creative brew of this deck that's more aggressively slanted. So basically the game plan is to curve into Hydro Hurricane on turn 6 and get a big payoff from it. So I've got Wave Strikers, which were released towards the tail end of the TCG. So I've got a level 2 Wave Striker, Merly the Oracle. So her effect is that while you have 2 or more other creatures in the battle zone that have Wave Striker, it gets a new ability where each of your creatures in the battle zone gets plus 1000 power. So she even buffs herself. That's pretty good. And then on turn 3, you want to play Azra, Vizier of Safety. And this is another Wave Striker, and it gets plus 4000 power and has blocker. So it's a good defense option, but it can also go on the attack. Then for turn 4, Hazaria, Duke of Thorns. So this guy is very helpful. His effect is that once he is in Wave Striker mode, if you put him into the battle zone, your opponent has to choose one of his creatures and sacrifice it. So it's a good way to kill Warlord Alzonius, Yuliana, and Petrova. He basically can kill those because you're not destroying it, your opponent is, so it gets around that effect. And then the last Wave Striker we play for the darkness section is Jagilla the Hidden Pillager. So this card is wild. So I'm honestly amazed that this is an uncommon. It's basically Lost Soul on legs. When you put it into the battle zone, your opponent discards 3 cards at random from his hand. So yeah, your opponent's basically just gonna lose his creatures, then lose his hand, and then turn 6, you're just gonna drop a Hydro Hurricane, blow away his mana, blow away whatever creatures are left, and just win. There's other things this deck can do. Even though this is a straightforward game plan, it's not the most consistent or reliable, but it is fun and satisfying, and that's part of why I love the deck. So for defense, we have a pretty good lifeline in Pala Olesis Morning Guardian. So this guy is an all-star in this deck. Very helpful because this deck is a bit fragile. These Wave Strikers, they're pretty weak on their own, and even with their power-ups, they can be a bit on the squishier side. Mass removal really throws a wrench in this deck. This protects me from Searing Wave, Burst Shot, Blizzard of Spears. It's just a phenomenal card to have. You just need 3 because Merly's buff is more important because you also need that Wave Striker count, but this also counts towards Hydro Hurricane, so it's not bad at all. And then speaking of blockers, 2 Tajamal, Vizier of Aqua. Very good card at stonewalling some of the more annoying fire creatures in the TCG format, such as Gaunta the Warrior Savage, Twin Cannon Sky Terror, Balmedius Steel Dragon, Pyrofighter Magnus. Just play 2 because this is a deck where you want to play everything out on curve, so having hybrid mana can sometimes gunk that up. In addition to all these blockers, I also run a pair of Belix the Explorer. He comes in very clutch in the late game. He lets me recycle my Hydro Hurricane and other spell cards that I might want to be able to cast later in the game. And then we have a bit of a minor engine here in 2 Fal'iga, so he's really essential. And of course, you're going to grab Hydro Hurricane with this. And now you have an extra light count on that, so that's another card they get mana burned on next turn. It's a very vicious cycle, and also you play 2 Morbid Medicine to do the Faliga Morbid Medicine loop. Then for big essential shield triggers, I've got 3 Terror Pit, very good, kills anything. It's a problem solver. I love it. It can be recycled with Faliga if there's a lot of issues on the field, but I typically will just want this to come out from shields or just charge it early on. It's an excellent card. Can't really not recommend it. And then one of the very few water cards in the deck is Aqua Surfer. Not as good as Terror Pit since it doesn't kill what it targets, but it is able to attack on the following turn, so he's pretty helpful. I like him a lot, and I found that just 3 is enough. You don't want to play too many water cards since you're trying to max out light and darkness for a big payoff from your Hydro Hurricane. But having at least a couple water cards is essential because you do need to be able to cast Hydro Hurricane, so you need some water cards to charge. The deck does require you to have specific cards and be able to do things in a specific order, so I have 3 Energy Stream. Just an all-around all-star. It gets you further into the deck, lets you grab more of your combo pieces, and then my 4th copy of Energy Stream is actually not an Energy Stream, it is a Marinomancer. So this guy is really awesome. He is Energy Stream on legs, but even better. By the time you get around to casting this guy, the odds of something useful like a Hydro Hurricane getting dumped aren't as bad, and you're usually going to be able to recycle it with a Faliga if you draw that, or you might not even need the Hydro Hurricane because you might have just gotten 2 Hazaria and a Merly, which then you can play on turn 6 as a level 2 and a level 4 together to get a power-up bonus and then also destroy something on the opponent's field. So overall, I really like this deck. It was such a weird... I don't know how to explain the way I came about building this. It was a lot of trial and error and testing, and I just went through my card collection just looking at stuff, and I was like, hey, these Wave Striker guys are kind of good. There's a lot of decent dark and light cards in this cycle, and I can make something kind of playable, because originally I was trying to run Legail, Seeker of Skyfire, and he's just garbage, he's rubbish. But I will admit, one issue with the deck is it plays a lot of very expensive cards. Kind of the elephant in the room here is Hazaria, Duke of Thorns, is just ridiculously overpriced. He is super short printed, and I would honestly say if you want to play this deck in real TCG cards, just get Saliva Worm instead. He is actually not bad. In fact, before I had a full set of Hazaria, I used Saliva Worm, and he was surprisingly sufficient. So his effect is basically a lot like Azra's, but instead of being a blocker, he has Darkness Stealth, which is a surprisingly good ability because most Darkness decks play a few blockers like Marrow Ooze and Bloody Skeeto, so him being able to be unblockable and a 6,000 for 3, or if you have enough Merleys on the field, can be like a 7 or 8k, that is actually not bad at all. It's not as good as non-targeting Destruction, but for an aggressive type deck like this, it isn't bad. And if you really want to lean into the Wave Striker theme, you can even try and get Lamiel, the Destiny Enforcer. But Lamiel is, in my honest opinion, not a bad card, but also not a very good card either. It does count as a Wave Striker though, so you might just want to run it simply to tick that box. But I would honestly say Misterios or Mongrel Man are better in general. So if you want to play this deck, but you don't want to spend a whole lot of money and break the bank on rare, expensive Duel Master cards, I have got good news for you. Master of Duel is still in business. He has high quality proxies, affordable shipping, and prices. This is a exact one-to-one replica of the deck that I just featured earlier, but it's all proxies, and I will even show you guys some of these unsleeved ones that I have here. I got Velix the Explorer, so obviously for legal reasons these cards can't really be too accurate to the original, but I'm just gonna show you close up. So this is a real TCG card, and you can see the quality. It's more or less the same. Obviously the font is a little spaced out, it's a little different, but it's perfectly playable. So what are my thoughts on the deck? I think this is unironically, without a doubt, the most powerful deck I've ever built, and I was honestly pretty surprised that it was so good. I was testing it and I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something with these Wave Strikers, but is it really that good? And then I got to some games where I would just play Jagilla on curve, make my opponent discard his entire hand, and then follow that up with the Hydro Hurricane. I was at that point thoroughly convinced that it was in fact the most powerful deck I'd ever built. It's kind of a monster. The only thing that comes close to it in terms of power level is that insane Mikey's Plier deck, which I in fact built as a response to this, but this deck is really, really good. It ends up kind of being a little weak in the early game if you don't get the right opening hand, but you can easily correct that with an Energy Stream or a Marinomancer here and there. And then once you actually have your Wave Strikers out, your opponent kind of just struggles to do anything once you have enough field presence. It's one of those decks that is a little slow to start up, but once it gets going, it's kind of unstoppable. It needs to be cut off early before it can really get too big, but there's so much draw and recursion and just all these annoying effects like Aqua Surfer, Terror Pit. You have Fal'iga, so you can recycle your Morbid Medicines and get all your Wave Strikers that got blown apart. You have Hydro Hurricane, which is just one of the most annoying spells to deal with, and the fact that it can be refreshed by either Bellix or Fal'iga to just repeat the fun can be absolutely maddening. And even without that card, which can sometimes even just be considered a win more, this deck is still really good. I really like this compared to the other Hydro Hurricane decks, which are very stall and control oriented. This is a nice control mid-range build, so it's not too slow, but it's also not hyper aggressive either. So it sits in a nice balance where it's a true mid-range deck that you can just adjust on the fly to match your opponent's tempo and lock them out of the game and just bash them with powerful creatures that stack power-up effects. I would highly recommend trying this deck. But anyway, gamers, I really appreciate you coming along with me on this journey, checking out my cool new deck. I'm not sure if I'll be doing any more Duel Masters deck profiles, but if I am, I'll let you guys know. Thank you for watching, and catch you gamers later.